Okay, section 3 of 3. James Monroe, possibly our tallest president in early American history. Um, Eye candy for the ladies, so they tell me. He was president from about 1817 to 1825, and during his time in office, it was right after the War of 1812, and America is doing its thing. So, everything that makes America great, James Monroe, America, 100%. Oh, yeah. So, Monroe, he's got some issues coming up with being a Virginian and going against the people in New England, and he's got this whole Federalist versus anti-Federalist debate, which we will look at here soon. We've got a time of massive industrialization in the North. We've got a time of a big agricultural boom in the South. This is called the era of good feelings. I mean, it's all sunshines and rainbows here for Madison's early presidency, or Monroe's early presidency, excuse me. So Monroe, he was one of parts of called the Virginian dynasty. Every president that came in the first few years of our country was a Virginian, with the exception of John Adams. And Monroe is elected in both 1816, 1820. He's got one party in the country. So they're Democratic Republicans. So instead of having all these different little political groups, there's one party to rule them all and one party to bind them. And yeah, this is the era of good feelings. Everything's golden. So in his foreign affairs, he's got one guy, John Quincy Adams, future president, son of John Adams, our second president, and he is the Secretary of State. But he's not just the Secretary of State, he is the Secretary of State like a boss, because this guy gets business done. And he's got all kinds of successes. He's got the Rush-Bagot Treaty in 1816, which limits the U.S. and British warships on the Great Lakes, so he's keeping the British out of our northern neck of the woods. He's going to fix the Canadian-American border to make sure that Britain can no longer say, yeah, well, we should actually extend just a little bit farther. He makes it clear, this is it. This is where Canada stops. Get over it. He keeps the Russians in Alaska instead of moving into different territories. He expands the fishing rights, which was huge for New Englanders. He signs the Adams-Onis Treaty, which he's going to allow the United States to gain Florida from Spain. He's going to handcraft the Monroe Doctrine, in which Britain is going to try to seek an alliance with the U.S. over Latin America, and the U.S. says, no, we're done with that. We don't want you in our front yard, backyard, round the side. We don't want you anywhere. We want Europe out of our hemisphere. Stay clear. So U.S. kind of becomes the big brother, the protector of the whole western hemisphere of the world. And we can see here Uncle Sam with his striped pants and no trespassing, and he's keeping all these British and Spaniards and Prussians and French out of the Western Hemisphere. So it's largely ignored, though. I mean, we don't really enforce it until Teddy Roosevelt, or Theodore Rex, King Teddy. And yes, he is riding a moose because that's how awesome he is. All right, so some of the results of the Monroe Doctrine. 1800, you can see the areas controlled by Europe. That little bit of red is the British, but mostly it's Spanish and Portuguese. But man, look at 1830 on the right. Independent countries, all are largely due to Europe kind of being kept out and letting the people in these countries create their own countries. And all of this was inspired, by the way, by our American Revolution in large part. All right, domestic affairs, so stuff at home. The Industrial Revolution hits Britain in about mid 1700s, and a guy named Samuel Slater. It's a cool story. Britain, it was kind of like Willy Wonka's chocolate factory, and they would not let the secrets out. And so this guy Samuel Slater goes in and he's working in this factory of the guy named Richard Arkwright, and he memorizes where everything is, every nut, every bolt, and he basically smuggles a factory out of Britain in his brain and brings it back to the U.S. and establishes a textile mill. And yeah, pretty cool stuff. And that's kind of the start of the Industrial Revolution here in America. So we've got a factory system, we've got division of labor, different people do different jobs. It's the age of machines. So just as technology is doing all kinds of awesome stuff now, like 3D printing limbs for people and growing ears on the back of mice and things, this was an age of machines for the people. Lowell, Massachusetts was one example. It's a whole town that's based on textile manufacturing or cloth manufacturing. This is also the market revolution. So tariffs or taxes protect baby industries. So new little American industries, we want people to buy from those instead of buying overseas. So we tax stuff that comes into the country. Henry Clay's American system, and Henry Clay, if you don't talk about him your next 2 years of life when it comes to social studies, you're being robbed, because this guy is a part of everything. He's one of what I call the super Americans. I mean, he is everywhere, and his system is pretty money making, smart, good idea kind of thing going on there. I don't know if that's a sentence, but it works for me right now. So yeah, he's one of these guys with along with John Calhoun and Daniel Webster that are super Americans. These guys just seem to get things done when it came to politics. So yeah, there you go. And some of this stuff we're going to kind of skip through that you don't necessarily need everything, but okay, and then the last thing I want to look at real quick, kind of close to home, is the Missouri Compromise. And in 1820, Missouri applied for statehood for, kind of like American citizenship. They want to be part of the club. But there's a big issue over slavery because if if we can continue to allow slave states, then there were a lot of people that were freaked out that the South and the slave power was going to get too powerful. And Jefferson, from his home Monticello in Virginia, says, "This momentous question, like a fire bell in the night, awakened and filled me with terror. I considered it at once the death knell of the Union." So Jefferson is saying, the guy that lived through the Revolution and the War of 1812, he's saying that this issue in Missouri is a big deal, whether to admit them as a slave state or a free state. This can spell the end of the Union. This can be it. America could divide again over this issue. So what he's talking about is a civil war. Years before the Civil War begins, decades before the Civil War even begins. So, kind of here's the breakdown. Here's the problem, real quick. New Hampshire proposes banning slavery in any state after Missouri applies. Illinois applies for statehood but doesn't outlaw slavery. It doesn't have to because it's part of the Northwest Territory, and remember, they had already outlawed slavery. So, the question was, is Missouri part of the Northwest Territory? Because if they are, then they cannot have slaves. And Missouri also could not enter with Alabama at the same time because that would be two slave states coming in. And they were all about trying to find a balance between the two. The Talmadge Amendment says no new slaves, and eventually we will emancipate. We'll free every slave that there is in what would become Missouri. Now, that's going to be a big deal because if we look in 1830 at the slave population, look over there to your right here where Missouri is, and you can see by county. So right in this area where we are about in the center, you've got between 600 to 52,600 slaves in that area. So that's going to be a lot of slaves in this one place. And look at all that red on the map in the southern part of the United States and up into Missouri. And you can kind of see why people that were anti-slavery were worried about this. Okay, we can see that Missouri is largely tobacco colonies, especially up north of here along Highway 70. And so the compromise is kind of this. 1820, Henry Clay is going to help draft this compromise. Remember, I said super American. We're going to hear a lot about him. And he says that two states will enter at a time. One has to be slave and one has to be free. And it prohibits slavery north of the 3630 line. That's the Missouri-Arkansas border. So that means that you can have no slavery in any state except Missouri that's created north of Arkansas. So all that territory from Arkansas up is going to be slave free except for Missouri. So all this, what's considered unorganized territory and Oregon country, all that kind of stuff, is outlawed from slavery in the future. And it does pass, and Missouri does become a state in 1821. Okay, so that's it. There's your three sections. Go back and watch anything. Make sure that you have all those guided notes because hint hint, you will probably have a quiz on this on Thursday. All right. Goodbye.